911, what's your emergency? There's been a bear attack. My friend, he's hurt bad. We're on the Eagle Ridge Trail, about 3 miles up from the parking area. Please, you need to send help now. Sir, is the bear still in the area? I don't know. Ben's bleeding and we need help. Immediately. In the pristine wilderness of Glacier National Park, Montana, beneath a canopy of towering pines and against the backdrop of snow-capped peaks, what began as a routine photography expedition would become a harrowing test of human survival instinct. The morning of July 15th, 2023, dawned crisp and clear, perfect conditions for what should have been just another day capturing nature's beauty. Ben Carter was 34 years old, a wildlife photographer from Denver with an infectious passion for the untamed wilderness. He had hiked these trails dozens of times, camera in hand, chasing the perfect shot of elk, mountain goats, and yes, even bears. Ben believed deeply in coexistence with wildlife, often saying to friends, "Respect the animals and they'll respect you." He had no idea that this morning would shatter that belief and push him to the very edge of survival. This is Ben Carter's story. A story of routine turned nightmare, maternal instinct meeting human vulnerability, and the moment when years of wilderness experience would either save his life or fail him completely. It's a story about what happens when the wild reminds us who's really in charge. You're watching Wilderness Survival Stories, where we bring you the most incredible real-life encounters between humans and nature's most dangerous predators. If you're fascinated by stories of human resilience and survival instinct, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon, because what you're about to witness will change how you see the wilderness forever. Ben's story isn't just another bear encounter, it's a masterclass in split-second decision-making, the power of wilderness training, and how the line between life and death in nature can be measured in heartbeats. This is the account of 47 minutes that would test everything Ben thought he knew about surviving in bear country. The Eagle Ridge Trail, where Ben nearly lost his life, is a 12-mile loop that winds through some of Montana's most spectacular and dangerous wildlife habitat. It's prime grizzly territory, especially during late summer when bears are actively foraging to build fat reserves for winter hibernation. Park rangers estimate that over 150 grizzly bears call this region home, making it one of the highest density bear populations in the lower 48 states. On this particular morning, Ben had set out before dawn with his longtime hiking partner, Mark Sullivan, a 29-year-old outdoor gear tester who shared Ben's love for wilderness photography. The two men had been planning this trip for months, hoping to capture images of the park's famous wildlife during the golden hour when light filters through the forest canopy like liquid amber. They had permits, proper food storage, bear spray, and between them, over 20 years of backcountry experience. Ben carried his trusted Canon 5D Mark IV with a 600mm telephoto lens, equipment worth over $8,000 that he'd saved 2 years to afford. Mark documented their adventures for his outdoor gear blog, testing backpacks, boots, and survival equipment in real wilderness conditions. Neither man could have predicted that their careful planning and extensive experience would be put to the ultimate test by a 400-pound female grizzly with 2 cubs. Ben had always been methodical about bear safety. He knew the statistics. Your chances of being attacked by a bear in Glacier National Park are roughly 1 in 2.1 million visits. He knew that most encounters end peacefully with the bear simply leaving the area. He knew that making noise, carrying bear spray, and properly storing food were the keys to safe wilderness travel. But statistics don't account for a mother bear who perceives a threat to her cubs. Statistics don't prepare you for the moment when 400 pounds of muscle and instinct charges at you through thick underbrush. And statistics certainly don't help when you have less than 3 seconds to make decisions that will determine whether you live or die. What Ben didn't know as he checked his camera settings that morning was that a female grizzly had established a day bed with her 2 first-year cubs less than 200 yards from the trail junction where he planned to set up his photography blind. The sow was an experienced mother, approximately 12 years old, who had successfully raised cubs before. She was alert, protective, and operating on millions of years of evolutionary programming that prioritized one thing above all else: defending her young. As Ben and Mark approached mile marker 3.2 on the Eagle Ridge Trail, the morning mist still clinging to the forest floor, neither man noticed the fresh bear sign, claw marks on a nearby pine, disturbed vegetation, and the unmistakable musky scent that experienced hikers learned to recognize. As a warning, the next 47 minutes would change Ben's life forever, testing his survival skills, his will to live, and his understanding of what it truly means to respect the wild places he loved to photograph. This is how one man's passion for capturing nature's beauty nearly cost him everything, and how wilderness training, quick thinking, and sheer determination turned what should have been a fatal encounter into an incredible survival story. Ben Carter wasn't just another weekend warrior with expensive camera gear. He was a man whose entire life had been shaped by an unshakable belief that humans and wildlife could coexist peacefully, a philosophy that would be tested to its absolute limits on that July morning in Glacier National Park. Born in 1989 in Fort Collins, Colorado, Ben grew up in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains with parents who instilled in him a deep reverence for the natural world. His father, David Carter, was a park ranger at Rocky Mountain National Park for over 30 years. His mother, Susan, taught environmental science at Colorado State University. The Carter household wasn't just outdoorsy, it was a living laboratory where wildlife conservation wasn't a hobby, it was a way of life. Ben's passion for wildlife photography began at age 12 during a family camping trip to Yellowstone. While other kids his age were glued to video games, Ben became obsessed with a disposable camera his parents had given him. He spent hours lying motionless in the grass, waiting for elk to graze close enough for a decent shot. That first roll of film contained 27 pictures, 23 were blurry disasters, but 4 captured moments of wildlife behavior that made his father stop and take notice. Ben had this incredible patience, even as a kid, recalls his mother Susan. Most children would get bored after 5 minutes of waiting for an animal to appear. Ben would lie there for hours, completely still, completely focused. It was like he understood something about wildlife that took others decades to learn. Throughout high school, Ben's obsession with wildlife photography intensified. He worked summers at his father's park, starting as a trail maintenance volunteer and eventually becoming the youngest person ever hired as a seasonal wildlife educator at Rocky Mountain National Park. By age 18, he had logged over 2,000 hours in backcountry wilderness, more than many professional guides accumulate in their entire careers. Ben's college years at Colorado State University were marked by a single-minded pursuit of 2 goals: earning his degree in wildlife biology and perfecting his photography skills. He spent every available weekend and holiday in the field, often camping alone for weeks at a time to document animal behavior. His professors remember him as the student who would disappear for days during spring break, only to return with incredible footage of wolverines or mountain lions that most wildlife biologists never see in their entire careers. It was during his junior year that Ben met Mark Sullivan at a campus outdoor gear expo. Mark, studying adventure journalism, was immediately drawn to Ben's incredible wildlife photographs and his wealth of backcountry experience. What started as a professional collaboration soon became a deep friendship built on shared adventures and mutual respect for the wilderness. Ben was the most wilderness-savvy person I'd ever met, Mark recalls. He could read animal sign like a detective reading clues. He knew which trees bears preferred for rubbing, how to identify fresh wolf tracks from week-old ones, and most importantly, he understood animal behavior in ways that kept both of us safe during hundreds of backcountry trips. After graduation, Ben turned down a lucrative job offer from a wildlife conservation organization to pursue freelance photography full-time. Work appeared in National Geographic, Outside Magazine, and Smithsonian, earning him recognition as one of the premier young wildlife photographers in North America. But Ben's success wasn't built on luck or reckless risk-taking. It was founded on an almost obsessive commitment to understanding and respecting the animals he photographed. Ben's approach to wildlife photography was methodical and ethical. He spent months researching animal behavior patterns before ever picking up his camera. He consulted with wildlife biologists, park rangers, and indigenous trackers to understand seasonal movement patterns, feeding behaviors, and signs of animal stress. His motto was simple: the shot is never worth the risk, to me or to the animal. Friends describe Ben as someone who possessed an almost supernatural ability to anticipate animal behavior. Sarah Henderson, a wildlife biologist who collaborated with Ben on several projects, remembers his uncanny instincts. Ben could sense when an elk was about to bolt before the elk knew it itself. He understood the subtle body language signals that most people never notice. That intuition saved him from potentially dangerous situations countless times. Ben's personal life reflected his professional obsessions. His Denver apartment was spartanly furnished but filled with top-tier outdoor gear, meticulously maintained and organized. He owned 7 different types of bear spray and tested each one annually. His backpack contained a survival kit that could sustain him for a week in emergency conditions. He practiced wilderness first aid scenarios monthly and held certifications in advanced wilderness medical care. But perhaps most importantly, Ben was a student of bear behavior. He had studied under Dr. Lynn Rogers, one of North America's foremost bear researchers, completing a month-long intensive course in bear ecology and safety. Ben could identify bear species by their tracks, estimate age and size from claw marks, and recognize behavioral cues that indicated a bear's emotional state and likely actions. Ben's bear safety protocol was exhaustive. He carried military-grade bear spray in a quick-access holster, made noise consistently while hiking, stored food in certified bear-proof containers, and maintained situational awareness that bordered on paranoia. In 8 years of professional wildlife photography, he had encountered bears 47 times, and every single encounter had ended peacefully with the bear leaving the area undisturbed. Those who knew Ben best would later say that his confidence in bear safety protocols wasn't arrogance, it was the quiet assurance of someone who had done everything right for nearly a decade. Ben believed deeply that bears were predictable if you understood their behavior, respectful if you respected them first, and manageable if you followed proper safety procedures. His personal philosophy about wildlife encounters was shaped by his father's decades of park ranger experience. Every animal encounter is a privilege, not a right. The moment you forget that you're a guest in their home is the moment you become dangerous, to yourself and to them. Ben's relationship with his hiking partner Mark was built on complete trust and complementary skills. While Ben was the wildlife expert and photographer, Mark brought technical expertise in outdoor gear and survival equipment. They had developed communication systems for wildlife encounters, practiced emergency scenarios, and established protocols for everything from weather emergencies to equipment failures. Their friendship had been tested in challenging conditions across North America, from photographing polar bears in Churchill, Manitoba, to documenting wolf packs in Alaska's Denali National Park. They had survived equipment failures, sudden weather changes, and multiple wildlife encounters that required split-second decision-making and perfect coordination. Mark trusted Ben's wildlife expertise implicitly, and Ben depended on Mark's technical skills and emergency preparedness. Together, represented over 20 years of combined wilderness experience, thousands of miles of backcountry travel, and dozens of successful wildlife photography expeditions. Yet those who knew Ben most intimately, his parents, his longtime girlfriend Rachel, and Mark, would later reflect that Ben's greatest strength might have also been his greatest vulnerability. His deep respect for wildlife and his confidence in proper safety protocols had never been tested by a truly life-threatening encounter. Ben had this beautiful belief that if you respected the wilderness, it would respect you back, his girlfriend Rachel would later say. He had never experienced the raw, primal violence that nature is capable of. Every bear he had ever encountered had behaved exactly as his training predicted. They would That morning in Glacier was different. Ben's extensive experience had created a framework of expectations about how bear encounters would unfold. Bears would detect human presence, the threat level, and typically retreat to avoid confrontation. Proper protocol: making noise, carrying bear spray, avoiding surprise encounters, had worked flawlessly for nearly a decade. But all of Ben's training and experience had one critical gap. He had never encountered a mother grizzly with cubs who perceived him as an immediate threat to her offspring. That scenario would require not just following established protocols, but adapting instantly to a situation where the bear's behavior didn't match any textbook description. As Ben checked his camera settings that July morning, adjusting his telephoto lens and scanning the tree line for wildlife movement, he carried with him not just 8 years of professional experience, but a lifetime of wilderness education, survival training, and deep respect for the animals. He loved to photograph. Everything he had learned, everything he believed, and everything he had practiced was about to be tested in the most intense 47 minutes of his life. Grizzly bears are apex predators that can run 35 miles per hour, climb trees with surprising agility, and possess bite force exceeding 1,200 pounds per square inch, enough to crush a bowling ball. In Glacier National Park, these magnificent and dangerous creatures roam freely across over 1 million acres of pristine wilderness, following ancient migration patterns that have remained unchanged for thousands of years. The grizzly bear that would forever change Ben Carter's life was a 12-year-old female known to park biologists as bear number 394. She stood nearly 4 feet tall at the shoulder, weighed approximately 400 pounds, and bore the distinctive grizzled coat coloring that gives these bears their name. Records showed she had successfully raised 6 cubs to independence over her lifetime, a remarkable achievement that marked her as one of the most experienced and protective mothers in the glacier ecosystem. Bear number 394 was first tagged as a 2-year-old subadult in 2013 during a routine research project studying bear population dynamics. Biologist Dr. Jennifer Hayes, who had monitored number 394 for nearly a decade, described her as exceptionally intelligent, highly territorial, and intensely protective of her offspring, traits that made her an excellent mother but potentially dangerous in human encounters. The bear's history revealed a pattern of successful adaptation to the increasing human presence in Glacier National Park. Unlike some bears that became habituated to human food sources or developed aggressive behaviors toward hikers, number 394 had maintained a healthy fear of humans while establishing territories in remote areas far from popular trails and camping areas. She was what we call a perfect wild bear, explains Dr. Hayes. She avoided human contact, raised her cubs in wilderness areas, and demonstrated natural foraging behaviors without any dependence on human food sources. In 10 years of monitoring, we never recorded a single negative human interaction with number 394. Bear number 394 first encountered the Eagle Ridge Trail area in late spring 2023, following seasonal food sources that drew her from her traditional territory nearly 15 miles to the north. Harsh winter conditions and late snowmelt had disrupted normal foraging patterns throughout the region, forcing many bears to range farther than usual in search of adequate nutrition. The area where Ben would encounter number 394 represented prime grizzly habitat during late summer. Abundant huckleberry bushes provided high-calorie food sources essential for building winter fat reserves. Mountain ash trees offered protein-rich nuts, while nearby streams contained spawning trout that supplemented the bear's diet with crucial fats and oils. Park rangers first noted number 394's presence in the Eagle Ridge area during routine wildlife monitoring on June 23, 2023. Trail cameras captured images of her foraging peacefully with her 2 cubs, both approximately 18 months old and still dependent on their mother for protection and survival training. The cubs, designated #394A and #394B by researchers, represented number 394's first successful offspring in 4 years. She had lost her previous litter to a dominant male bear during their first winter, a tragic but common occurrence that makes mother bears extraordinarily protective of surviving cubs. Losing her previous cubs made number 394 hypersensitive to potential threats, explains Dr. Hayes. Mother bears who have experienced cub mortality often display heightened protective behaviors. They become more aggressive, more territorial, and far less tolerant of perceived dangers to their remaining offspring. Initial observations showed number 394 establishing a day bed approximately 200 yards from the Eagle Ridge Trail junction, a location that provided excellent sight lines for detecting potential threats while remaining close to prime foraging areas. Her choice of bedding site followed classic grizzly behavior, positioned upwind to catch scents, elevated to provide visual surveillance, and near escape routes that would allow rapid retreat with cubs if necessary. For 3 weeks, number 394 and her cubs used the area without incident. Park monitoring showed normal foraging patterns, healthy cub development, and typical maternal behaviors. Trail cameras recorded the family group moving through the area during early morning and late evening hours, times when human traffic was minimal. Ben had actually photographed number 394 from a distance during a previous visit to Glacier in May 2023, though he was unaware of her specific identity or location preference. His images, captured from over 400 yards using extreme telephoto lenses, showed her teaching cubs to forage for roots and berries, classic maternal behavior that Ben documented for a National Geographic article on grizzly family dynamics. That May encounter was textbook perfect, recalls Mark Sullivan. Ben spotted the bears from a safe distance, photographed them without disturbing their natural behavior, and we left the area without any direct interaction. It was exactly how wildlife photography should work. Park wildlife manager Robert Chin had been monitoring increased bear activity in the Eagle Ridge area throughout summer 2023. Maintenance crews reported fresh bear sign, and several hikers submitted photographs of distant bear sightings to park authorities. Encounters remained within normal parameters, bears and humans sharing habitat without conflict. We knew there was active bear presence in that area, Chin explains. But number 394 was demonstrating appropriate wild behavior. She was avoiding direct human contact, foraging in natural areas, and showing no signs of food conditioning or aggressive behavior toward people. The specific environmental factors that would contribute to the July 15th encounter had been building for weeks. A late spring had concentrated multiple bear family groups in lower elevation areas, creating competition for prime foraging sites. Drought conditions had reduced natural water sources, forcing bears to range wider in search of adequate hydration. Most critically, the timing of Ben's photography expedition coincided with a crucial period in cub development. At 18 months old, number 394's cubs were learning essential survival skills but remained completely dependent on their mother's protection. This developmental stage triggers the most intense protective behaviors in female grizzlies. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a bear behavior specialist who later analyzed the encounter, explains, mother bears with cubs in their second year exhibit peak protective aggression. The cubs are large enough to attract predator attention but still lack survival skills. Mothers during this period will defend cubs against threats they might otherwise ignore. Weather conditions on July 14th and 15th created additional factors that would influence the encounter. High atmospheric pressure had reduced wind patterns, limiting the bear's ability to detect approaching humans through scent. Dense morning fog affected visibility for both bears and hikers. Temperature inversions trapped scents close to ground level, creating sensory conditions that increased the likelihood of surprise encounters. Number 394's behavior during the 48 hours preceding the encounter showed signs of increased stress and hypervigilance. Trail cameras captured images of her frequently checking wind direction, moving cubs between multiple day beds, and displaying alert postures that indicated heightened awareness of potential threats in her territory. Looking at the camera footage afterward, we could see she was already on high alert, notes Dr. Hayes. Her body language showed classic signs of a mother bear who perceived increased danger in her environment. She was primed for defensive action. The specific location where the encounter would occur represented a perfect storm of geographic and behavioral factors. The trail junction sat in a natural funnel where topography channeled both human and bear movement through a narrow corridor. Dense vegetation limited sight lines to less than 30 yards. Stream noise masked approaching footsteps. The area's rich food sources made it attractive to bears while its scenic beauty drew photographers like Ben. Importantly, number 394 had established what wildlife behaviorists call a critical space bubble around her cubs, an invisible perimeter that, if breached by potential threats, would trigger immediate defensive action. For a mother grizzly with second-year cubs, this space typically extends 100 to 150 yards in all directions. Ben's planned photography setup would position him just outside this critical distance under normal conditions. However, the environmental factors, reduced wind scent dispersal, limited visibility, acoustic masking from stream noise, would compress number 394's comfort zone significantly. Under perfect conditions, Ben's approach might not have triggered a defensive response, explains Dr. Mitchell. But the combination of environmental stressors, reduced sensory awareness, and number 394's heightened protective state created a scenario where normal safety distances became inadequate. The cubs themselves would play a crucial role in escalating the encounter. At 18 months, they were naturally curious and prone to investigative behaviors that brought them closer to potential dangers. Number 394's maternal instincts prioritized keeping cubs away from threats, but their developmental stage made them unpredictable and difficult to control in high-stress situations. As Ben prepared his camera equipment that July morning, adjusting telephoto lenses and planning his approach to the photography blind, number 394 was nursing her cubs in their day bed 180 yards from the trail junction. Her morning routine included scent-checking the surrounding area, positioning herself for optimal sight lines, and maintaining constant awareness of potential threats to her offspring. Neither Ben nor number 394 was aware that atmospheric conditions, terrain features, and the bear's heightened protective state had created circumstances where normal safety protocols would prove insufficient. The stage was set for an encounter that would test everything Ben had learned about surviving in grizzly country, and everything number 394 knew about protecting her young. The next 47 minutes would demonstrate that in the wilderness, even perfect preparation and extensive experience cannot account for every variable when humans and apex predators share the same terrain. In the 72 hours leading up to July 15, 2023, a series of subtle but significant changes in bear number 394's behavior patterns should have served as warning signs to anyone trained in reading wildlife indicators. Unfortunately, these signs remained hidden from human observers, creating a dangerous information gap that would contribute to the morning's near-fatal encounter. Trail cameras positioned throughout the Eagle Ridge area captured number 394's increasing agitation beginning on July 12. Unlike her previous weeks of calm, predictable movement patterns, the footage showed a bear exhibiting classic stress behaviors, frequent territory marking, repetitive scent-checking activities, and multiple relocations of her day bed site within a 48-hour period. Dr. Jennifer Hayes, reviewing the footage days later, would identify at least 7 distinct behavioral changes that indicated number 394's escalating defensive mindset. She was exhibiting what we call hypervigilance cascade, Hayes explains. Each perceived threat amplified her stress response, making her increasingly reactive to stimuli she would normally ignore. The trigger for number 394's behavioral shift appeared to be the presence of a large adult male grizzly that had moved into the area on July 11. Designated bear number 447 by park researchers, this 600-pound male represented a significant threat to number 394's cubs. Male grizzlies are known to kill cubs that aren't their own offspring, eliminating competition for resources and bringing females back into breeding condition. Trail camera footage from July 12 showed number 394 aggressively defending her territory against number 447's intrusion. The cameras captured her bluff, charging the much larger male, using intimidation tactics to convince him to seek food sources elsewhere. While her defensive display succeeded in driving number 447 away, the encounter left her in a heightened state of alertness that would persist for days. Mother bears don't just return to normal after defending against a male, explains bear behavior specialist Dr. Sarah Mitchell. The stress hormones remain elevated for 48 to 72 hours. During this period, they perceive threats everywhere and react with maximum defensive aggression to protect their cubs. Wildlife photographer and Glacier National Park veteran Tom Morrison had been hiking the Eagle Ridge Trail system for over 15 years. On July 13, just 2 days before Ben's encounter, Morrison noticed subtle signs that experienced wilderness travelers learned to recognize as bear warnings. The forest was too quiet, Morrison recalls. Usually you hear birds, squirrels chattering, maybe an elk bugling in the distance. But that morning, it was dead silent. In my experience, that kind of silence means there's a large predator in the area and everything else is staying hidden. Morrison also discovered fresh bear sign that indicated recent territory marking behavior, claw marks on pine trees that appeared to be less than 24 hours old, disturbed vegetation showing recent foraging activity, and what appeared to be fresh scat containing berry seeds and fish bones. Most significantly, Morrison found what bear experts call a rub tree, a large pine with fresh hair samples and scent marking that indicated a bear was actively claiming territory in the immediate area. The hair samples, later tested by park biologists, confirmed the presence of both an adult female and juvenile bears. I've been hiking in bear country long enough to know when to turn around, Morrison explains. Everything about that area screamed, active bear territory. I cut my hike short and reported the sign to park rangers, but the information didn't reach trail maintenance crews until after Ben's encounter. Park Ranger Lisa Rodriguez received Morrison's report on July 14 but faced a common dilemma in wilderness management, balancing public safety with overreaction to normal wildlife activity. Glacier National Park averages over 50 bear sighting reports per week during summer months, and closing trails for every reported sign would effectively shut down the park's trail system. We evaluated Tom's report according to standard protocols, Rodriguez explains. Fresh sign is common throughout the park and we hadn't received any reports of aggressive bear behavior or close encounters. The decision was made to increase ranger patrols in the area rather than issue trail closures. The increased ranger presence, however, may have inadvertently contributed to number 394's stress levels. On July 14, 2 separate ranger patrols passed through her territory within a 6-hour period, unusual human activity that would have registered as potential threats to a bear already operating in hypervigilant mode. Dr. Hayes later analyzed the situation. From number 394's perspective, her territory was being invaded repeatedly. First the male bear, then increased human activity. Each intrusion reinforced her perception that her cubs were in danger, ratcheting up her defensive responses. Ben Carter and Mark Sullivan began their final approach to the Eagle Ridge Trail at 5:47 a.m. on July 15, arriving at the parking area while morning fog still clung to the forest floor. Ben's equipment check revealed meticulous preparation, fully charged camera batteries, cleaned lenses, bear spray with safety removed for quick access, and emergency communication devices tested and functional. Ben was more thorough than usual that morning, Mark recalls. He spent extra time checking his bear spray, made sure our emergency whistle was easily accessible, and reviewed our communication protocols twice. Looking back, it's like he sensed something might be different about this trip. The hiking conditions seemed ideal as they began their ascent, calm winds, perfect lighting for photography, and excellent visibility once they climbed above the fog layer. Ben noted the unusual quiet in his voice recorder, a device he used to document environmental conditions for his photography logs. 6:23 a.m., Mile marker 1.5, Ben's voice recorded. Exceptional visibility, minimal wind, perfect conditions for wildlife photography. Noting unusual. Absence of bird activity, possible indicator of predator presence in area. Maintaining heightened awareness and standard bear safety protocols. At mile marker 2.1, Ben and Mark encountered their first concrete sign of recent bear activity, a partially consumed deer carcass approximately 50 yards off the main trail. The carcass showed classic bear feeding patterns, efficient processing of high-value meat and organs while leaving bones and hide largely intact. Finding that deer carcass should have been a major red flag, wildlife biologist Dr. Hayes later commented. Bears with cubs become extremely territorial around food sources. Any bear feeding in that area would view approaching humans as competition for resources. Ben photographed the carcass for documentation purposes, noting in his voice recorder that the feeding patterns suggested a large bear with cubs, based on the methodical processing and multiple feeding sessions evidenced by varying stages of decomposition. However, Ben's extensive experience with bear behavior led him to a conclusion that, while logical, proved dangerously incomplete. He reasoned that finding an active feeding site meant bears were focused on the carcass and unlikely to be encountered along the main trail corridor. Ben made a classic wilderness mistake, explains Dr. Mitchell. He assumed bear behavior would follow predictable patterns based on his previous experience. But he was dealing with a stressed mother bear whose behavior was being driven by protective instincts rather than feeding priorities. Mark later admitted having concerns about continuing toward their planned photography site after discovering the deer carcass. I suggested we turn back or choose a different location, Mark recalls. But Ben was confident in his read of the situation. He'd been right about bear behavior so many times before that I trusted his judgment. At mile marker 2.8, just 0.4 miles from their planned photography setup, Ben and Mark encountered the most significant warning sign of all, fresh bear tracks in muddy trail conditions that showed a large adult bear and two smaller animals moving in the same direction they were hiking. The tracks were less than 2 hours old based on moisture content and edge definition. Ben measured the front paw print at nearly 9 inches long, indicating a substantial adult bear. The accompanying smaller tracks suggested cubs in the 18-month age range based on size and stride pattern. Those tracks should have ended our hike immediately, Mark now admits. Fresh tracks moving in our direction meant we were following bears to their destination. Every wilderness safety protocol says to turn around in that situation. But Ben's analysis led him to a different conclusion. The tracks showed a steady walking pace without signs of agitation or rapid movement. There were no stress indicators like deep claw marks or erratic spacing. To Ben's experienced eye, the tracks suggested bears moving calmly through their territory following established routes. I've followed bear tracks dozens of times without incident, Ben recorded in his voice notes. These show normal movement patterns. Maintain noise discipline, deploy standard safety protocols, and proceed with extreme caution too. Photography blind. Ben's confidence was reinforced by his comprehensive safety preparations. He carried 2 canisters of bear spray, maintained voice contact with Mark every 30 seconds, and followed noise-making protocols designed to avoid surprise encounters. His experience suggested that following proper procedures would ensure a safe photography session. What Ben couldn't know was that number 394's heightened protective state meant normal safety distances would prove inadequate. The environmental conditions, reduced wind for scent dispersal, acoustic masking from nearby stream noise, and limited visibility through dense vegetation were creating circumstances where standard protocols might fail. At 7:42 a.m., Ben and Mark reached their planned photography setup point at the trail junction near mile marker 3.2. Ben began assembling his telephoto equipment while Mark established their emergency communication position and monitored surrounding terrain for wildlife activity. The location was perfect for photography, Mark recalls. Excellent sight lines, natural camouflage for our position, and multiple escape routes if we needed to retreat quickly. Ben had chosen the spot based on months of planning and previous successful shoots in similar locations. Ben's final equipment check showed everything functioning perfectly, camera settings optimized for early morning light, telephoto lens providing 600mm reach for distant subjects, and bear spray positioned for instant access. His confidence was based on nearly a decade of successful wildlife photography in similar conditions. 7:58 a.m., final position established, Ben recorded. Excellent conditions for wildlife photography. Maintaining full awareness of surroundings and ready to implement emergency protocols if necessary. Confident in safety preparations and situational assessment. Less than 200 yards away, bear number 394 was nursing her cubs in their daybed, unaware that humans had entered her critical defense perimeter. Her stress levels remained elevated from the previous day's territorial challenges, and environmental conditions prevented her from detecting Ben and Mark's approach through normal scent and auditory cues. The stage was set for an encounter that would test every aspect of Ben's wilderness survival training and number 394's protective instincts. Neither party was aware that the next few minutes would transform a routine photography expedition into a life-or-death struggle for survival. Saturday, July 15, 2023, 8:03 a.m. The morning air hung still and crisp at 4,200 feet elevation, with patches of fog dissipating slowly through the dense pine canopy. Ben Carter adjusted his camera's telephoto lens one final time and settled into position behind the natural blind he had constructed from fallen logs and dense undergrowth. Bear number 394 lay in her daybed 187 yards to the northeast, her massive bulk barely visible through the thick vegetation. Her two cubs, #394A and #394B, nursed contentedly while she maintained constant surveillance of the surrounding territory. Her ears rotated continuously, scanning for audio threats that her compromised scent detection couldn't identify due to the still air conditions. At 8:05 a.m., Ben activated his voice recorder for what would become a minute-by-minute documentation of the encounter. Positioned at photography blind, excellent visibility across clearing. Light conditions optimal for telephoto work. No wildlife visible yet, but multiple game trails. Suggest high-activity area. Mark Sullivan had established overwatch position 15 feet behind Ben, equipped with binoculars, emergency communication devices, and ready access to their bear spray arsenal. His job was environmental awareness while Ben focused on photography, a system they had perfected during hundreds of previous wildlife sessions. 8:07 a.m., Mark reporting all clear from overwatch position, Mark whispered into his own recorder. Wind conditions calm, visibility excellent. Except for residual fog patches in low areas. Ben beginning systematic scan of target photography zones. Ben's telephoto lens swept slowly across the clearing, searching for any sign of wildlife movement. His camera settings were optimized for the challenging lighting conditions, ISO 800 to compensate for forest shadows, aperture at f/5.6 for adequate depth of field, and shutter speed at 1/500 th/second to freeze any animal movement. Unknown to Ben, his systematic scanning pattern was creating subtle light reflections off his telephoto lens that number 394's keen eyesight detected as anomalous flashes in her territory. These brief light signals registered as potential threats, causing her stress levels to begin climbing from their already elevated baseline. At 8:09 a.m., number 394 rose to a sitting position, her massive head turning slowly toward the approximate direction of Ben's photography blind. Her cubs immediately responded to their mother's changed posture, ceasing their nursing and adopting alert positions that mirrored her body language. Something's got her attention, Dr. Jennifer Hayes would later analyze from trail camera footage. You can see the exact moment when number 394 transitions from resting awareness to active threat assessment. Her posture changes, her ears focus directionally, and most importantly she positions herself between the perceived threat and her cubs. Ben noticed movement in his peripheral vision at 8:11 a.m. but initially dismissed it as wind-disturbed vegetation. His voice recorder captured his assessment: possible movement in Sector 3, but no confirmed wildlife sighting. Maintaining position and continuing systematic observation. The movement Ben had detected was actually number 394 conducting reconnaissance of his position. Using terrain features for concealment, she had begun a cautious approach to investigate the anomalous signals she had detected in her territory. Her movement pattern followed classic predator investigation behavior: advance, observe, assess, advance again. Mark's overwatch position provided a different angle of observation that should have detected number 394's approach. However, the bear's natural camouflage coloring and her expert use of available cover made her nearly invisible even to trained observers. The vegetation was so dense that a 400-pound bear could move within 50 yards without being detected, Mark later recalled. At 8:13 a.m., environmental conditions began shifting in ways that would prove crucial to the encounter's development. A slight thermal wind began developing as morning sun heated the forest floor, carrying human scent toward number 394's position for the first time since Ben and Mark had. The sudden detection of human scent triggered an immediate escalation in number 394's threat assessment. Her previous territorial challenges with male bear number 447, combined with days of hypervigilant stress, had primed her for maximum defensive response to any perceived danger to her. When number 394 caught human scent, her entire behavioral pattern changed, explains bear behavior specialist Dr. Sarah Mitchell. Trail camera footage shows her transitioning from investigative curiosity to defensive preparation in less than 30 seconds. Her body language shifts to threat, display posture, and she begins positioning for protective action. Ben's voice recorder captured his growing awareness that something significant was developing. 8:14 a.m., noting unusual forest quiet. Complete absence of bird activity, which typically indicates large predator presence. Increasing vigilance while maintaining photography position. The forest's unnatural silence that Ben noted was actually caused by number 394's movement through the area. Birds, small mammals, and other wildlife had detected the agitated bear's presence and retreated to safe distances, creating an acoustic dead zone that stretched for hundreds of yards. Around her position, at 8:15 a.m., number 394 made a critical decision that would determine the encounter's trajectory. Rather than retreating with her cubs to avoid potential human conflict, her elevated stress levels and maternal protective instincts drove her to advance toward the perceived threat to assess and potentially eliminate the danger to her offspring. This is where number 394's previous territorial stress became crucial, Dr. Hayes explains. A bear in normal condition might have gathered her cubs and moved away from human scent. But number 394's heightened defensive state made retreat feel like abandoning her cubs to danger. Her protective instincts demanded investigation and potential confrontation. Mark detected the first concrete sign of bear presence at 8:16 a.m. when he observed ravens suddenly taking flight from an area approximately 100 yards northeast of their position. Ravens diving indicates scavenger activity, which usually means large predator movement, Mark whispered to Ben. We should consider repositioning. Ben's response revealed both his confidence in established safety protocols and his commitment to the photography opportunity. Ravens could indicate multiple factors: maintaining current position but increasing alert status. We have clear retreat routes and full defensive capability if needed. The clear retreat routes that Ben referenced were indeed available, but his assessment didn't account for the speed at which a grizzly bear can cover ground. At full charge, number 394 could traverse the 100 yards separating them in approximately 8 to 10 seconds, far faster than humans could retreat to safety. At 8:17 a.m., number 394's cubs began exhibiting anxiety behaviors that would prove crucial to escalating the encounter. Trail camera footage shows both juveniles moving restlessly, making small vocalizations, and seeking closer contact with their mother. Their distress was communicating to number 394 that her cubs perceived immediate danger. When cubs show anxiety, mother bears interpret this as confirmation that threats are real and imminent, explains Dr. Mitchell. Cubs' fear responses trigger maximum protective aggression in mothers. At this point, number 394 would have been physiologically prepared for combat. Ben finally achieved direct visual contact with bear number 394 at 8:18 a.m. when she briefly appeared in a gap between pine trees. His voice recorder captured his initial assessment: contact with adult female grizzly, approximate distance 85 yards. Bear appears calm, no aggressive posturing. Detected. Excellent photography opportunity developing. Ben's assessment of number 394 as calm demonstrated a critical misreading of bear body language under stress conditions. What he interpreted as relaxed posture was actually number 394 in threat assessment mode, motionless, hyper-alert, and preparing for potential defensive action. The 85-yard distance that Ben estimated placed him well within number 394's critical defense perimeter for protecting cubs. For a mother grizzly in normal condition, this distance might have been manageable, but number 394's elevated stress levels had compressed her comfort zone significantly. At 8:19 a.m., Ben began photographing number 394, unaware that his camera's motor drive and shutter sounds were registering as aggressive auditory signals to the hypersensitive bear. Each camera operation created mechanical noises that number 394's stressed nervous system interpreted as potential threat displays. Camera sounds in the wilderness environment can trigger defensive responses in stressed animals, Dr. Hayes explains. The rapid clicking motor drive noises and lens adjustment sounds don't exist in natural forest environments. To a hypervigilant bear, these sounds could indicate aggressive territorial displays from unknown threats. Mark noticed number 394's reaction to the camera sounds. I could see her ears rotating toward our position with each photo Ben took. Her head position changed, becoming more directly focused on our location. Something about her body language was making me increasingly uncomfortable. At 8:20 a.m., number 394 made the decision that would transform the encounter from wildlife observation to life-threatening emergency. She began advancing directly toward Ben's position, using available cover but moving with purpose rather than the cautious investigation pattern she had followed previously. Ben detected the approach at 8:21 a.m., his voice recorder capturing the moment. Bear advancing toward position, approximately 65 yards and closing. Movement appears investigative rather than aggressive. Preparing to implement noise-making protocols to encourage retreat. Ben's implementation of noise-making protocols involved verbal announcements designed to identify human presence and discourage bear. Approach, hey bear. Human presence. Move away. The calls were delivered in firm but non-threatening tones, following established wilderness safety procedures. However, number 394's response to Ben's verbal warnings revealed the extent of her defensive mindset. Rather than retreating upon recognizing human presence, she accelerated her approach. The cubs' continued anxiety vocalizations were overriding any natural avoidance of human contact. When bears are in extreme protective mode, normal deterrent strategies can backfire, explains Dr. Mitchell. Verbal warnings that would typically cause retreat can instead be interpreted as threats requiring immediate response to protect cubs. At 8:22 a.m., number 394 closed to within 45 yards of Ben's position. Mark's voice recorder captured his growing alarm, bear continuing approach. Despite verbal warnings, Ben, we need to consider immediate retreat to emergency positions. Ben's response revealed his continued confidence in established protocols. Bear spray effective range is 30 feet. Current distance provides adequate safety margin. Maintaining position and monitoring for behavioral changes indicating imminent threat. The adequate safety margin that Ben referenced was based on optimal conditions for bear spray deployment. However, his calculation didn't account for number 394's ability to cover the remaining distance in approximately 4 to 5 seconds, or for environmental factors that might reduce spray effectiveness. At 8:23 a.m., the cubs' anxiety peaked when they lost visual contact with their mother during her approach toward Ben's position. Their distress vocalizations became more urgent, creating acoustic pressure that demanded immediate protective response from number 394. Cub distress calls trigger neurological responses in mother bears that override rational threat assessment, Dr. Hayes explains. At this point, number 394 was operating on pure protective instinct. She was no longer evaluating threat levels. She was responding to evolutionary programming that prioritized cub safety above all other considerations. Ben achieved his final pre-encounter photographs at 8:24 a.m., capturing images of number 394 at approximately 35 yards distance. The photographs would later reveal classic pre-attack posturing: lowered head, focused stare, compressed body position indicating preparation for explosive movement. Looking at those final photographs, number 394's body language clearly indicated imminent charge, Dr. Mitchell later analyzed. Her posture showed all the classic signs of a bear transitioning from threat assessment to active defense of cubs. At 8:25 a.m., the encounter reached its critical moment. Number 394's cubs moved toward their mother's position, inadvertently placing themselves between Ben and number 394, a positioning that would trigger the most intense protective response possible from a mother grizzly. Ben's voice recorder captured the final pre-attack moment. 8:25 a.m., cubs moving into view, bear at 30 yards, situation escalating rapidly. Preparing defensive measures. Then, at exactly 8:25 and 47 seconds a.m., bear number 394 charged. 8:25 and 47 seconds a.m. Bear number 394 exploded from her crouched position with the terrifying speed that makes grizzly bears one of nature's most formidable predators. Her 400-pound frame accelerated from 0 to 25 miles per hour in less than 3 seconds, covering the initial 15 yards to Ben's position in a blur of muscle, claws, and maternal fury. Bear charging. Ben's voice cracked across the morning stillness, his training finally kicking in as the theoretical became devastatingly real. Hands moved instinctively to the bear spray holstered at his chest, but number 394's explosive speed compressed his reaction time to mere seconds. Mark Sullivan's perspective from Overwatch position captured the encounter's initial moments. Everything happened so fast that my brain couldn't process it. 1 second Ben was photographing a distant bear. The next second 400 pounds of grizzly was covering ground like a freight train. The sound of her charge, branches breaking, heavy breathing, claws digging into earth, was absolutely terrifying. Ben's survival training took over as his conscious mind struggled to process the approaching threat. Years of wilderness emergency drills had programmed specific responses into muscle memory. Deploy bear spray at 20 feet, aim slightly downward to account for spray pattern, create noise to deter attack, protect vital organs if contact occurs. At 12 feet, Ben successfully deployed his bear spray, creating an orange cloud of capsaicin concentrate directly in number 394's path. Under optimal conditions, the spray should have created an impenetrable barrier that would stop the charge and send the bear retreating. However, morning's still air conditions and number 394's extreme motivational state created circumstances where standard deterrence proved insufficient. The bear spray did impact her, wildlife expert Dr. Jennifer Hayes later analyzed from witness accounts. We could see her flinch and shake her head when she hit the spray cloud. But her protective drive was so intense that she powered through the chemical deterrent. That level of determination indicates maximum maternal defensive response. Number 394's charge didn't stop, it intensified. The bear spray caused her to close her eyes and rely on scent and hearing to target Ben's position, making her approach more erratic but no less dangerous. Her massive head swung side to side as she cleared the spray from her nasal passages, while continuing her explosive advance. Ben's second survival decision saved his life, rather than turning to run, which would have triggered number 394's prey chase instincts and resulted in being caught within steps. He dropped to the ground and assumed the defensive position that wilderness training had drilled into him thousands of times. Playing dead with an attacking grizzly is counterintuitive to every human survival instinct, explains bear behavior specialist Dr. Sarah Mitchell. But Ben's decision to drop and cover rather than run was absolutely correct. Running would have guaranteed a fatal outcome by triggering chase. Behavior. Ben hit the ground face down, hands locked behind his neck, elbows protecting his face, legs spread wide to prevent being flipped over. The backpack provided crucial protection for his spine and vital organs. The entire sequence from spray deployment to defensive position took less than 4 seconds. Number 394 reached Ben's position at 8:25 and 54 seconds a.m., exactly 7 seconds after beginning her charge. Her initial contact was a massive paw swipe that caught Ben's left shoulder, the force spinning him partially sideways despite his prone position. The impact tore through his backpack's outer fabric and left 4 parallel claw marks in the aluminum frame. The first contact was like being hit by a sledgehammer, Ben later described. The force was beyond anything I could have imagined. The shoulder joint separate, and the pain was instantaneous and overwhelming. But my training kept me motionless. Any movement would have escalated her attack. Mark's position allowed him to witness the encounter's most critical moments. Number 394 was in full attack mode, but something seemed different about her behavior. She wasn't trying to kill Ben. She was trying to neutralize what she perceived as a threat to her cubs. Her actions were defensive rather than predatory. Number 394's second contact involved grabbing Ben's backpack in her jaws and attempting to drag him away from her cub's location. The bear's bite force, exceeding 1,200 pounds per square inch, compressed the pack's frame and contents while Ben remained motionless, fighting every instinct to struggle or cry out. Remaining passive during that dragging was probably what saved Ben's life, Dr. Hayes explains. Struggling would have convinced number 394 that he was still a threat requiring more aggressive neutralization. His complete stillness helped convince her that the threat had been eliminated. The dragging lasted approximately 15 seconds, during which number 394 moved Ben nearly 25 feet from his original position. Ben's voice recorder, still running in his chest pocket, captured the sounds of the attack: heavy breathing from the bear, fabric tearing, the scrape of claws on rocky ground, and Ben's controlled breathing as he maintained defensive posture. Ben's shoulder injury was severe but not life-threatening. Number 394's initial swipe had dislocated his left shoulder and created deep lacerations that would require extensive medical treatment. However, the injury's location, while painful and disabling, avoided damage to vital organs or major blood vessels. The shoulder injury was actually fortunate in terms of placement. Trauma surgeon Dr. Michael Chen would later assess. A few inches higher and the claws could have severed the carotid artery. A few inches lower and we could have been dealing with punctured lung or heart damage. At 8:26 and 15 seconds a.m., number 394's behavior began transitioning from active attack to threat assessment. Having moved the perceived threat away from her cubs and receiving no resistance from Ben, her defensive programming began evaluating whether additional action was necessary. Mark faced his own life or death decision during these crucial moments. His training indicated he should deploy his own bear spray or create loud noises to distract number 394 from Ben. However, any intervention risked redirecting the bear's attention toward himself or escalating her defensive responses. I was torn between helping Ben and not making the situation worse, Mark recalls. Bear behavior experts had taught us that intervening in an attack can sometimes increase the danger to the victim. I had to trust that Ben's passive defense strategy would work. Number 394's cubs played a crucial role in de-escalating the encounter. During the attack, both juveniles had remained in their original position, approximately 60 yards from the conflict. Their calm behavior, no distress calls or movement toward the danger, began signaling to number 394 that her defensive action had been successful. When cubs remain calm during a mother's defensive display, it indicates to her that the threat has been neutralized, explains Dr. Mitchell. The cub's behavior was essentially telling number 394 that her protective action had worked and no further aggression was necessary. Ben's most critical survival decision occurred at 8:26 and 20 seconds a.m. when number 394 approached his motionless form for what behaviorists call threat confirmation, a final assessment to determine if the neutralized threat was truly inactive. This phase of bear encounters proves fatal for many victims who assume the attack is over and attempt to move or escape. Number 394's massive head, lowered to within inches of Ben's neck and back, her breath audible on his recording equipment as she conducted olfactory and auditory investigation of his condition. Threat confirmation is when most bear attack victims make fatal mistakes, Dr. Hayes explains. The natural human response is to assume the danger has passed and attempt escape, but any movement during this phase can restart the aggressive response. Ben remained absolutely motionless for 90 seconds while number 394 conducted her investigation. His voice recorder captured her heavy breathing, sound of her massive paws shifting position around his body, and the terrifying moment when she briefly grabbed his backpack again to test for resistance. Those 90 seconds felt like hours, Ben later described. I could feel her breath, smell the wild scent of her fur, hear every small sound she made. My shoulder was screaming with pain, but I knew that any movement could restart the attack. I focused on controlled breathing and staying completely passive. Number 394's final assessment of Ben occurred when she used her massive paw to gently push against his back, testing for movement or response. Ben's complete lack of reaction, despite the pressure on his injured shoulder, convinced the bear that the threat had been fully neutralized. At 8:27 and 52 seconds a.m., number 394 began her withdrawal from the encounter site. Her movement pattern showed classic post-defensive behavior, slow retreat, while maintaining visual contact with the neutralized threat, frequent stops to assess any changes in the situation, and gradual transition from alert defensive posturing to normal travel mode. Mark watched number 394's retreat with intense relief mixed with concern for Ben's condition. She moved away slowly, stopping every few yards to look back at Ben. I could see her transitioning from attack mode to normal bear behavior. But Ben was still motionless, and I couldn't tell how badly he was hurt. The encounter's resolution demonstrated number 394's fundamental motivation throughout the attack. Rather than pursuing further aggressive action, she immediately moved to collect her cubs and relocate to a safer area. Her behavior confirmed expert analysis that the attack had been purely defensive, aimed at neutralizing a perceived threat rather than eliminating prey. Number 394's post-attack behavior proves this was maternal defense, not predatory aggression, Dr. Mitchell explains. She removed the threat, confirmed it was neutralized, then prioritized moving her cubs to safety. A predatory attack would have involved completely different behavioral patterns. Ben remained motionless for an additional 3 minutes after number 394's departure, following wilderness survival protocols that recommend extended passive behavior to ensure the bear has completely left the area. His voice recorder captured his whispered status report, 8:30 a.m. Bear has withdrawn, severe shoulder injury, conscious and responsive, requesting immediate medical assistance. Mark's approach to Ben's position required extreme caution to avoid triggering any remaining defensive response from number 394, who was still visible, collecting her cubs approximately 100 yards away. I had to balance getting help to Ben with not creating any sudden movements or sounds that might bring the bear back, Mark explains. The total duration of active attack behavior lasted 2 minutes and 5 seconds from initial charge to number 394's final withdrawal. Encounter's psychological impact, the compressed time perception, intense fear response, and life-threatening decision-making created memories that would feel like hours to both Ben and Mark. Time distortion during life-threatening encounters is a normal psychological response, trauma psychologist Dr. Lisa Wong later explained. The brain's heightened awareness during extreme stress creates detailed memories that seem to last much longer than the actual event duration. Ben's survival of the encounter represented a perfect convergence of extensive wilderness training, correct split-second decision-making, and circumstances that allowed number 394's defensive programming to achieve its goal without requiring fatal force. The attack had ended, but Ben's fight for survival was just beginning. At 8:33 a.m., with number 394 and her cubs disappearing into the thick forest, Mark began his approach to assess Ben's injuries and coordinate emergency medical response. The most dangerous phase of the encounter was over, but the most critical phase for Ben's survival was about to begin. 8:33 a.m. Mark Sullivan's hands trembled as he activated his emergency satellite communicator, the device's familiar weight feeling foreign in the aftermath of witnessing his best friend nearly killed by a grizzly bear. The morning air, which had seemed perfect for photography just minutes earlier, now carried the metallic scent of blood and the lingering chemical residue of bear spray. Emergency services, this is Mark Sullivan, coordinates 48.7596 degrees north, 113.7870 degrees west, Eagle Ridge Trail mile marker 3.2, Mark's voice cracked into the satellite device. I need immediate medical evacuation. My hiking partner has been attacked by a grizzly bear. He's conscious but has severe injuries and cannot walk. Ben remained motionless in his defensive position, following protocols that required maintaining passive posture until absolutely certain the bear had completely departed the area. His left shoulder screamed with pain that seemed to pulse with each heartbeat, and he could feel warm blood soaking through his torn shirt. Ben, can you hear me? Mark whispered, approaching cautiously while maintaining visual contact with the tree line where bear number 394 had disappeared with her cubs. The bear's gone, but I need to know your condition before I move you. Ben's response was barely audible. Shoulder dislocated, deep lacerations, but I'm conscious and responsive. Don't move me yet, need to be absolutely sure she's not coming back. How long since she left? About 4 minutes, Mark replied, checking his GPS watch while scanning for any sign of bear movement. I can see her tracks heading northeast, but no visual contact. Emergency services are coordinating rescue response now. The satellite communicator crackled with the voice of Lisa Chin, emergency dispatcher for Glacier National Park's Search and Rescue Coordination Center. Mark, this is Glacier. We're launching immediate medical response. Can you provide victim assessment and current threat status? Mark's training as an outdoor gear tester had included wilderness first aid certification, but assessing bear attack injuries while maintaining security watch pushed his skills to their limits. Victim is conscious and alert, severe left shoulder injury with visible lacerations and apparent dislocation. No signs of head trauma or spinal injury. Bear has withdrawn from area with cubs, moving northeast. Copy that. Helicopter ETA is 12 minutes. Do not attempt to move the victim. Maintain current position and monitor for bear return. Response team is being dispatched to secure the area. At 8:37 a.m., Ben finally felt confident enough to attempt limited movement. His careful transition from prone defensive position to sitting upright revealed the full extent of his injuries. 4 parallel claw marks across his left shoulder, a dislocated joint that rendered his arm completely unusable, and extensive bruising where number 394's massive paw had made contact. The pain was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, Ben later described. Not just the sharp agony of the dislocated shoulder, but this deep, bone-level ache where her claws had raked across muscle and tissue. Every breath sent shockwaves through my entire left side. Mark's first aid assessment revealed injuries that were serious but not immediately life-threatening. The claw lacerations, while deep and bleeding steadily, had missed major arteries. The shoulder dislocation was severe but didn't appear to involve nerve damage. Most critically, Ben showed No signs of internal injuries or traumatic shock. Ben's training probably saved him from more severe trauma, Mark recalls. His defensive positioning had protected all his vital organs. The backpack had absorbed much of the bear's bite force, and his prone posture had prevented claw contact with his neck or face. At 8:41 a.m., the distinctive sound of rotor blades echoed across the forest as Glacier National Park's emergency medical helicopter approached. The rescue coordinates. Pilot Sarah Rodriguez and flight medic James Mitchell had responded to dozens of wilderness emergencies, but bear attacks represented some of the most challenging evacuations due to ongoing wildlife threats and complex injuries. Approaching Eagle Ridge Trail, mile marker 3.2, Rodriguez's voice came through Mark's satellite communicator. Ground party, can you confirm? Area is secure for landing approach. Mark conducted a 360-degree visual sweep of the surrounding terrain before responding. Area appears secure, no visual contact with bear for 8 minutes. Victim is stable and conscious, ready for evacuation. The helicopter's landing in the small clearing adjacent to the trail required precise navigation through tall pine trees and variable wind conditions. Created by the forest canopy. Rodriguez's 15 years of mountain rescue experience enabled a perfect touchdown just 40 yards from Ben's position. Flight medic James Mitchell approached Ben's location with equipment specifically designed for wilderness trauma: lightweight spine board, portable force system, advanced pain management medications, and communication gear for coordinating with trauma surgeons during transport. Ben, I'm James, flight medic with Glacier SAR, Mitchell announced while beginning his medical assessment. I need to examine your injuries and get you stabilized for transport. Can you tell me your pain level on a scale of 1 to 10? 8 and climbing, Ben responded through gritted teeth. Left shoulder is dislocated, deep lacerations across the joint, but I can move my fingers and feel sensation in my hand. No spinal pain, no head trauma, no difficulty breathing. Mitchell's rapid trauma assessment confirmed Ben's self-diagnosis while revealing additional injuries. Severe bruising across his back where number 394 had dragged him, minor lacerations on his neck from contact with broken branches, and early signs of shock from blood loss and trauma stress. We're going to stabilize that shoulder and get you some pain relief, Mitchell explained while preparing in 4-line. The good news is your injuries are serious but manageable. The bad news is this is going to hurt for a while. At 8:47 a.m., Wildlife Officer Rebecca Martinez arrived at the scene via ATV, equipped with non-lethal deterrence and tracking equipment to monitor bear number 394's location and ensure no further threat to rescue operations. Bear family group last seen moving northeast toward Avalanche Creek drainage, Martinez reported. Tracks indicate steady travel away from encounter site. Mother bear showing normal post-defensive behavior patterns. No immediate threat to rescue operations. Martinez's wildlife expertise proved crucial for understanding the encounter's context and preventing future incidents. Her examination of the attack site revealed classic maternal defense patterns: the brief duration, defensive rather than predatory behavior, and immediate withdrawal once the perceived threat was neutralized. This was textbook protective behavior from a mother with cubs, Martinez later filed in her incident report. The bear did exactly what her instincts demanded: neutralize the threat and protect her offspring. She showed no interest in pursuing additional aggressive action once the human was no longer perceived as dangerous. Ben's medical stabilization required careful balance between pain management and maintaining consciousness for helicopter transport. Mitchell administered morphine for pain relief while monitoring vital signs that showed elevated heart rate and blood pressure consistent with trauma response but no signs of life-threatening complications. The morphine helped with the pain but didn't eliminate it completely, Ben recalls. I could still feel every movement as they prepared me for transport, but the relief was enough that I could think clearly and communicate effectively with the medical team. Loading Ben into the helicopter required precise coordination to avoid further injury to his dislocated shoulder. The medical team used specialized restraint systems that immobilized his injured arm while allowing access for continued treatment during the 23-minute flight to Kalispell Regional Medical Center. At 8:52 a.m., the helicopter lifted off with Ben secured aboard and Mark accompanying as emergency contact and witness to the encounter. The flight path provided aerial views of bear number 394's territory, where thermal imaging confirmed the bear family had moved over a mile from the encounter site and was exhibiting normal foraging behaviors. From the air, you could see how the terrain had contributed to the encounter, Pilot Rodriguez observed. Dense vegetation, multiple game trails converging at that junction, and perfect bear habitat. It was exactly the kind of location where surprise encounters become possible despite following proper safety protocols. The helicopter's medical bay became a mobile trauma unit as Mitchell continued Ben's treatment during transport. For fluids addressed dehydration and potential shock, while continuous monitoring ensured stable vital signs throughout the flight to definitive medical care. Ben remained conscious and communicative throughout the transport, Mitchell recalls. His wilderness experience and fitness level were major factors in his stability. He understood his injuries, could assist with treatment decisions, and maintained remarkable composure considering what he'd just survived. Mark's role during transport involved providing detailed witness accounts to emergency personnel who would investigate the encounter and assess future trail safety measures. His documentation of the attack's timeline, bear behavior patterns, and Ben's survival responses would prove crucial for official incident analysis. Documenting everything while it was still fresh in my memory felt surreal, Mark explains. We'd gone from a routine photography expedition to a life-or-death emergency in less than 3 minutes. But I knew the information would be important for understanding what had happened and preventing future incidents. At 9:15 a.m., Kalispell Regional Medical Center's trauma team received notification of the incoming bear attack victim. Dr. Susan Walsh, the hospital's chief trauma surgeon, had treated numerous wilderness injuries, but bear attacks presented unique challenges requiring specialized protocols and extensive surgical intervention. The helicopter touched down at the hospital's landing pad at 9:17 a.m., where a full trauma team waited to continue Ben's treatment. His survival of the encounter was confirmed, but his recovery would require months of medical intervention and rehabilitation. 9:17 a.m., Kalispell Regional Medical Center. Dr. Susan Walsh had spent 15 years treating wilderness trauma, but as Ben Carter was wheeled into Trauma Bay 3, she immediately recognized the distinctive injuries that marked him as a grizzly bear attack survivor. The parallel claw lacerations, the specific pattern of tissue damage, and the patient's remarkable composure despite severe injuries told a story she had encountered only twice before in her career. Patient is a 34-year-old male, conscious and alert, bear attack victim with severe left shoulder trauma, flight medic James Mitchell reported. During handoff, dislocated shoulder joint, for deep lacerations requiring surgical repair, stable vital signs throughout transport. Patient has been cooperative and provided detailed medical history. Ben's initial medical assessment revealed injuries that were severe but had remarkably avoided life-threatening complications. X-rays showed a posterior shoulder dislocation with no fractures, while the claw lacerations had missed major blood vessels by millimeters. His wilderness fitness and proper defensive positioning had prevented the catastrophic injuries that often result from grizzly encounters. Ben was extraordinarily fortunate in terms of injury placement, Dr. Walsh later explained. The bear's claws had raked across muscle tissue, without severing the brachial artery or damaging the brachial plexus nerve bundle. A few millimeters in either direction could have resulted in permanent disability or life-threatening blood loss. The surgical repair of Ben's injuries required over 4 hours of meticulous work. Dr. Walsh's team cleaned and debrided the claw lacerations, relocated his dislocated shoulder, and used 127 stitches to close wounds that extended nearly 8 inches across his shoulder and upper arm. The surgery's complexity was compounded by the need to prevent infection from bacteria carried in bear claws. Bear claws carry significant bacterial loads from their diet and environment, Dr. Walsh explains. Grizzly attack wounds have high infection risk, requiring aggressive antibiotic therapy and careful monitoring. We treated Ben's injuries as if they were contaminated with multiple dangerous pathogens. Ben regained consciousness in the recovery room at 2:30 p.m., immediately asking about bear number 394's status and whether the encounter would result in the bear being destroyed. His first concern wasn't his own injuries but the welfare of the animal that had nearly killed him, a response that surprised medical staff but perfectly reflected his lifelong commitment to wildlife conservation. "Is the bear okay?" were Ben's first words upon waking, according to recovery nurse Patricia Johnson. He was more concerned about whether the bear would be euthanized than he was about his own injuries. It was remarkable to see someone maintain that level of compassion after such a traumatic experience. Wildlife Officer Rebecca Martinez visited Ben's hospital room at 4:15 p.m. to conduct the official incident interview and address his concerns about bear number 394's fate. Her report would determine whether the bear posed ongoing public safety risks requiring removal from the wild population. "Ben, I want to assure you that bear number 394 will not be destroyed based on this encounter," Martinez explained. "Our investigation confirms this was classic maternal defense behavior. The bear acted to protect her cubs, showed no food-seeking or predatory behavior, and immediately withdrew after neutralizing the perceived threat. She was behaving exactly as a wild bear should behave." Martinez's decision reflected Glacier National Park's science-based wildlife management policies that distinguish between defensive bear behavior and problematic aggression requiring intervention. Number 394's textbook protective response, combined with her immediate withdrawal and lack of food conditioning, classified the encounter as a defensive action rather than dangerous behavior. "This encounter actually demonstrates that number 394 is exactly the kind of bear we want in our ecosystem," Martinez continued. "She's raising cubs successfully, avoiding human conflict, and exhibiting appropriate wild behavior. The attack occurred because she perceived a threat to her offspring, not because she's a dangerous or problematic animal." Ben's family arrived at the hospital at 6:30 p.m., having driven through the night from Colorado after receiving Mark's emergency notification. The parents, David and Susan Carter, both experienced wilderness professionals, understood the statistical rarity of bear attacks but struggled with the emotional impact of their son's near-fatal encounter. Seeing Ben in that hospital bed brought home the reality of wilderness risks in a way that decades of professional experience hadn't prepared us for. His father David recalls, "We knew the dangers intellectually, but experiencing the aftermath of a bear attack was emotionally devastating." Ben's girlfriend, Rachel Martinez, had coordinated media response from Denver, fielding calls from National Geographic, Outside Magazine, and numerous news outlets seeking details about the encounter. Her background in public relations proved crucial for managing information flow while protecting Ben's privacy during recovery. "The media attention was overwhelming," Rachel explains. "Everyone wanted details about the attack, photographs of Ben's injuries, and expert commentary about bear safety. We had to balance public interest with Ben's need to focus on recovery without constant interruptions." The official investigation into the encounter began while Ben was still in surgery. Park Superintendent James Wilson assembled a team including wildlife biologists, bear behavior experts, and trail safety specialists to analyze the incident and determine if policy changes were needed to prevent similar encounters. "Every bear encounter in Glacier receives thorough investigation," Wilson explains. "We examine human behavior, bear behavior, environmental factors, and trail conditions to identify any systemic issues that contributed to the incident. Our goal is learning from each encounter to improve visitor safety while protecting wildlife." The investigation team's findings revealed a confluence of factors that had created conditions for the encounter despite Ben's extensive experience and proper safety protocols. Environmental conditions, number 394's elevated stress from territorial challenges, and the cub's developmental stage had combined to create circumstances where normal safety measures proved insufficient. Ben did everything right according to established protocols, lead investigator Dr. Jennifer Hayes concluded. He carried bear spray, made appropriate noise, followed proper trail procedures, and executed perfect defensive responses during the attack. This encounter demonstrates that even optimal human behavior cannot eliminate all risk in grizzly habitat. The investigation's recommendations focused on enhanced pre-trip education about environmental factors that increase encounter risk, improved signage about bear activity during cub rearing seasons, and additional research into how climate change and habitat pressures might be affecting bear behavior patterns. We can't make the wilderness completely safe, Wilson notes, but we can help visitors understand the dynamic nature of wildlife encounters and make more informed decisions about when and where to recreate in bear country. Ben's recovery progress exceeded medical expectations, with shoulder mobility returning faster than typical for posterior dislocation injuries. Wilderness fitness and positive attitude contributed to rehabilitation success that had him moving his arm within 48 hours of surgery. Ben was an ideal patient, physical therapist Maria Santos recalls. His understanding of anatomy from wildlife biology studies helped him follow rehabilitation protocols precisely. His motivation to return to wilderness photography drove him to exceed every recovery milestone we set. The psychological impact of the encounter proved more complex than the physical injuries. Ben experienced classic post-traumatic stress symptoms including sleep disruption, hypervigilance in outdoor settings, and intrusive memories of the attack. However, his extensive knowledge of bear behavior helped him process the experience within a scientific framework rather than developing irrational fears. Understanding why the attack happened helped Ben cope with the trauma, explains Dr. Lisa Wong, the trauma psychologist who worked with Ben during recovery. He could analyze the encounter objectively, recognizing that number 394's behavior was predictable and appropriate rather than random violence. That cognitive framework was crucial for his psychological healing. Mark Sullivan struggled with different psychological challenges, including survivor guilt and questioning his decision not to intervene during the His witness testimony proved crucial for the official investigation, but reliving the encounter repeatedly for investigators and reporters took an emotional toll. I kept second-guessing every decision I made during those critical minutes, Mark explains. Should I have been more insistent about turning back when we found the deer carcass? Should I have deployed bear spray when I saw number 394 approaching? The what-ifs were consuming. Professional counseling helped Mark understand that his decisions had likely prevented a more tragic outcome. Bear behavior experts confirmed that intervention during the attack could have escalated number 394's defensive response, potentially resulting in fatal injuries for both men. The encounter's impact extended beyond Ben and Mark to the broader wildlife photography community. Professional organizations updated safety protocols, gear manufacturers developed improved bear deterrent products, and photography workshops began incorporating more extensive bear behavior education. Ben's encounter became a case study for wildlife photographers worldwide, explains National Geographic photographer Joel Sardor. Demonstrated that even extensive experience and perfect equipment can't eliminate all risk. The wilderness photography community used his experience to develop better safety practices and emergency protocols. Bear number 394 and her cubs continued to thrive in Glacier's ecosystem following the encounter. Wildlife monitoring showed normal foraging behaviors, successful cub development, and appropriate avoidance of human activity areas. The encounter had no lasting impact on her natural behavior patterns. Number 394 represents exactly what we want to see in our grizzly population, Dr. Hayes notes. She's successfully raising cubs, maintaining wild behavior, and contributing to ecosystem health. The encounter, while traumatic for Ben, was simply a mother bear doing her job of protecting her offspring. Ben's hospital stay lasted 4 days, during which he received over 200 messages of support from fellow photographers, wilderness enthusiasts, and bear conservation advocates. His positive attitude and continued support for grizzly protection impressed medical staff and influenced public discussion about human-wildlife coexistence. Ben's response to the encounter was remarkable, Dr. Walsh reflects. Most attack victims develop negative attitudes toward the animals that injured them. Ben's continued advocacy for bear conservation while recovering from serious injuries demonstrated extraordinary character and genuine commitment to wildlife protection. On July 19, Ben was discharged from Kalispell Regional Medical Center with his left arm in a sling, detailed rehabilitation instructions, and a follow-up schedule that would monitor his recovery for the next 6 months. His first request was to visit the Eagle Ridge Trail, not to relive the encounter, but to honor the wilderness that had tested him and the bear that had taught him profound lessons about nature's power and unpredictability. Dr. Jennifer Hayes has studied grizzly bear behavior for over 20 years, analyzing hundreds of human-bear encounters across North America. She reviewed the evidence from Ben Carter's July 15 encounter with bear number 394. Her analysis revealed a textbook example of how multiple factors can converge to create dangerous situations despite perfect human preparation and normal bear behavior. Ben's encounter represents what we call a perfect storm scenario, Dr. Hayes explains. You had an experienced mother bear exhibiting appropriate protective behavior, a highly trained human following established safety protocols, and environmental conditions that compressed normal safety margins. Neither party did anything wrong, yet the encounter still resulted in serious injuries. The behavioral analysis of bear number 394's actions during the encounter showed classic maternal defense patterns that wildlife experts recognize as evolutionarily programmed responses. Her initial investigation of the perceived threat, escalation to defensive charging, and immediate withdrawal after neutralizing the danger followed predictable sequences that have ensured grizzly survival for thousands of years. Number 394's behavior was textbook perfect from a bear's perspective, Dr. Hayes continues. She detected a potential threat to her cubs, assessed the situation, took decisive action to eliminate the danger, and immediately prioritized relocating her offspring to safety. Every action demonstrated exactly the kind of wild behavior we want to see in our grizzly populations. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a bear behavior specialist who has researched over 300 documented grizzly encounters, identified specific elements of Ben's survival that distinguished his case from fatal attacks. Her analysis revealed that Ben's extensive wilderness training had programmed responses that aligned perfectly with number 394's behavioral patterns. Ben's decision to deploy bear spray at 12 feet was optimal timing, Dr. Mitchell explains. Earlier deployment would have been ineffective due to spray dispersal patterns. Later deployment wouldn't have created any deterrent effect. His choice to assume defensive position rather than run was absolutely crucial. Running would have triggered chase behavior that could have been fatal. Medical expert Dr. Susan Walsh, who performed Ben's surgical reconstruction, analyzed the injury patterns to understand the encounter's physical dynamics. Her findings revealed that number 394's contact with Ben was remarkably restrained for a grizzly bear capable of delivering over 1,200 pounds of bite force. The injury patterns tell a story of a bear using minimal force necessary to neutralize a perceived threat, Dr. Walsh explains. If number 394 had intended to kill Ben, the claw placement would have targeted his neck or vital organs. Instead, her strikes focused on immobilizing him and demonstrating dominance. The injuries, while serious, were consistent with defensive rather than predatory behavior. Wilderness safety expert Tom Richardson, who has trained thousands of outdoor enthusiasts in bear encounter protocols, used Ben's experience to identify critical elements that other recreationists can apply to their own wilderness travel. Ben's survival demonstrates that proper training works, but it also shows the limitations of any safety system, Richardson explains. His bear spray deployment, defensive positioning, and passive response were executed perfectly. However, his encounter also reveals how environmental factors can compress safety margins beyond what standard protocols anticipate. The environmental analysis conducted by park climatologist Dr. Andrea Chin identified atmospheric and terrain conditions that contributed to the encounter's severity. Her research revealed how climate change impacts are affecting traditional bear behavior patterns and creating new challenges for human-wildlife coexistence. The still air conditions that morning prevented normal scent dispersal, reducing both the bear's ability to detect approaching humans and the effectiveness of bear spray, Dr. Chin explains. These atmospheric patterns are becoming more common as climate change affects regional weather systems, creating increased encounter risks that our traditional safety protocols may not adequately address. Trauma psychologist Dr. Lisa Wong analyzed the psychological factors that enabled Ben's survival and recovery. Her research identified specific mental training elements that proved crucial during the life-threatening encounter. Ben's extensive wilderness experience had created what we call stress inoculation, repeated exposure to challenging outdoor situations that built psychological resilience, Dr. Wong explains. When the life-threatening situation occurred, his mind could access trained responses rather than panic reactions. This mental preparation was as important as his physical survival skills. The legal analysis of the encounter, conducted by wildlife law expert Professor James Martinez, examined the incident's implications for wilderness recreation liability and park management policies. His findings influenced how federal agencies approach visitor education and risk management in grizzly habitat. Ben's case demonstrates the legal complexity of wilderness recreation, Professor Martinez explains. Despite following all established safety protocols and receiving proper pre-trip education, he still suffered serious injuries from wildlife encounter. This raises important questions about visitor assumption of risk and agency responsibilities for public safety in wild areas. Dr. Hayes conducted comparative analysis with similar encounters across North America, identifying patterns that distinguish survivable encounters from fatal attacks. Her research revealed specific factors that consistently determine encounter outcomes. Survivors of grizzly encounters share common characteristics: extensive wilderness experience, proper equipment deployment, correct behavioral responses, and crucially, encounters with bears exhibiting defensive rather than predatory behavior, Dr. Hayes notes. Ben's case exemplifies all these survival factors working together. The gear analysis conducted by outdoor equipment specialist Lisa Park examined how Ben's equipment performance affected the encounter. Her findings influenced manufacturer improvements to wilderness safety products. Ben's bear spray worked exactly as designed, creating a deterrent cloud that impacted the charging bear, Park explains. However, number 394's extreme motivational state allowed her to power through the chemical deterrent. This demonstrates why bear spray, while highly effective, cannot guarantee encounter prevention under all circumstances. Emergency response expert Captain Mike Rodriguez analyzed the rescue coordination that saved Ben's life after the encounter. His assessment of the 23-minute response time from initial emergency call to helicopter evacuation revealed the critical importance of proper emergency communication equipment. Ben and Mark's satellite communicator was crucial for their survival, Rodriguez explains. The device provided precise GPS coordinates and enabled real-time communication with rescue coordinators. Without that technology, evacuation time could have extended to hours, potentially resulting in fatal complications from shock and blood loss. Wildlife photographer Joel Sardor, who has documented animals in over 50 countries, used Ben's experience to develop enhanced safety protocols for professional photographers working in predator habitat. Ben's encounter changed how professional wildlife photographers approach bear country assignments, Sardor explains. We now factor environmental conditions, bear behavior research, and seasonal timing more carefully into our safety planning. Ben's experience provided real World data that improved safety protocols across the industry. The cub's role in the encounter received specific analysis from juvenile bear behavior specialist Dr. Maria Santos, whose research focuses on how offspring influence maternal protective responses in large carnivores. The cub's age, 18 months, represented peak vulnerability and maximum protective response from their mother, Dr. Santos explains. This developmental stage, cubs are large enough to attract predator attention but lack survival skills for independent escape. Mothers during this period exhibit the most intense defensive behaviors in their reproductive cycle. Park management specialist Robert Chin analyzed the policy implications of Ben's encounter for wilderness recreation management. The recommendations influenced how federal agencies balance public access with wildlife protection. Ben's case demonstrates that even perfect human behavior cannot eliminate encounter risks in grizzly habitat, Chin explains. This reality requires honest education about wilderness risks and visitor acceptance of residual danger that cannot be managed away through policy or infrastructure improvements. The economic impact analysis conducted by recreation economist Dr. Patricia Williams examined how high-profile bear encounters affect wilderness tourism and local communities dependent on outdoor recreation revenue. Ben's encounter generated significant media attention that initially decreased visitor numbers to Glacier National Park, Dr. Williams explains. However, his positive attitude toward bear conservation and continued wilderness advocacy actually enhanced long-term public support for grizzly protection programs. Dr. Mitchell's final analysis identified the most crucial lesson from Ben's encounter for other wilderness users: the importance of understanding that proper preparation increases survival odds but cannot eliminate all risks in wild places. Ben's experience teaches us that wilderness recreation involves accepting calculated risks that cannot be reduced to zero, Dr. Mitchell concludes. His survival resulted from excellent preparation meeting favorable circumstances. Other encounters with identical preparation might have different outcomes due to variables beyond human control. The collective expert analysis of Ben Carter's encounter with bear number 394 created a comprehensive understanding of human-grizzly interactions that has influenced safety education, park management policies, and wilderness recreation practices across North America. Ben's willingness to share his experience and advocate for continued bear conservation despite his injuries has contributed valuable scientific knowledge that benefits both human safety and wildlife protection efforts. Ben's encounter provides a perfect case study in wilderness risk management, Dr. Hayes concludes. It demonstrates both the effectiveness of proper preparation and the inherent uncertainties of sharing habitat with apex predators. His experience has made wilderness recreation safer for thousands of future visitors while supporting the conservation of one of North America's most magnificent and dangerous species. Ben Carter's harrowing encounter with bear number 394 on that July morning in Glacier National Park teaches us the most profound lesson about wilderness survival: that respect, preparation, and proper response can mean the difference between tragedy and triumph, even when facing nature's most formidable predators. Ben's survival wasn't luck. It was the result of years of dedicated training, meticulous preparation, and split-second decisions executed perfectly under life-threatening pressure. His story demonstrates that extensive wilderness education, combined with proper equipment and unwavering respect for wild animals, creates the foundation for surviving encounters that claim less prepared victims. The key prevention lessons from Ben's experience are clear and actionable. Always carry bear spray in an easily accessible holster and practice deployment techniques until they become muscle memory. Make consistent noise while hiking in bear country, especially during low visibility conditions or near streams that mask approaching footsteps. Recognize environmental warning signs: unusual forest quiet, fresh bear tracks, feeding sites, and territorial markings that indicate active predator presence. Most critically, understand that bear encounters require different responses than other wildlife situations. Never run from a charging bear. Triggers prey chase instincts that guarantee fatal outcomes. Deploy bear spray at 20 to 30 feet, not sooner. If contact occurs, assume defensive. Position immediately, face down, hands behind neck, legs spread to prevent being flipped, and remain motionless until absolutely certain the bear has departed. Ben's legacy extends far beyond his personal survival story. His willingness to share his experience openly, despite reliving traumatic memories, has educated thousands of wilderness enthusiasts about bear behavior and survival techniques. His continued advocacy for grizzly conservation, while recovering from serious injuries, demonstrates extraordinary character and genuine commitment to wildlife protection. I never wanted to become known as a bear attack survivor, Ben reflects 6 months after the encounter. But if my experience helps other people safely enjoy the wilderness while supporting bear conservation, then something positive has come from those terrifying minutes with number 394. The policy changes implemented following Ben's encounter have improved safety education throughout the national park system. Enhanced pre-trip briefings now include information about environmental factors that increase encounter risks. Trail signage has been upgraded to provide real-time bear activity information. Emergency communication requirements have been strengthened for backcountry permits. Bear number 394 continues to thrive in Glacier's ecosystem, successfully raising her cubs and contributing to the park's healthy grizzly population. Wildlife monitoring shows she has maintained appropriate wild behavior, avoiding human contact while utilizing her traditional territory. The encounter had no lasting impact on her natural behavior patterns. She simply did what millions of years of evolution programmed her to do when she perceived threats to her offspring. Ben's recovery exceeded all medical expectations. Within 6 months, he had regained full shoulder mobility and returned to wilderness photography. His first post-recovery expedition took him back to Glacier National Park, not to the site of his encounter, but to document the same grizzly family from a respectful distance using proper safety protocols. Returning to bear country was psychologically challenging but absolutely necessary, Ben explains. I couldn't let fear prevent me from doing what I love. The wilderness isn't inherently dangerous, it's wild. Understanding that distinction is crucial for anyone who wants to experience nature's raw beauty. Mark Sullivan has become a wilderness safety educator, using his witness perspective to teach proper emergency response and decision-making under pressure. His experience demonstrates the critical importance of hiking partnerships, emergency communication equipment, and maintaining composure during crisis situations. The broader wilderness community has embraced Ben's story as a teaching tool for responsible recreation in predator habitat. Professional guide services incorporate his encounter into safety training. Wildlife photography workshops use his experience to demonstrate proper behavioral protocols. Outdoor gear manufacturers have improved bear deterrent products based on lessons learned from his equipment performance. Expert consensus from Ben's encounter emphasizes that wilderness recreation involves accepting calculated risks that cannot be eliminated entirely. Even perfect preparation and flawless execution of safety protocols cannot guarantee complete protection in wild places. This reality requires honest education about wilderness dangers and visitor acceptance of residual risks that are part of authentic nature experiences. The most important lesson from Ben's survival is that fear should never prevent people from experiencing the wilderness, but respect absolutely must guide every decision. Bears are powerful, potentially dangerous animals that deserve our cautious admiration rather than our terror. Education, equipment, and behavior protocols enable safe coexistence with these magnificent predators. Ben's encounter also demonstrates the remarkable effectiveness of established safety protocols when properly implemented. His bear spray deployment, defensive positioning, and passive response were executed exactly as wilderness training recommends. These techniques, developed through decades of research and real-world testing, work when applied correctly under pressure. The wilderness isn't trying to kill you, Ben often tells audiences during his safety presentations. Animals like number 394 are just trying to survive and protect their families, exactly like we would in similar circumstances. Understanding their motivations and respecting their capabilities allows us to share their habitats safely. As Ben returns to his passion for wildlife photography, his approach incorporates enhanced safety protocols informed by his life-changing encounter. He maintains even greater situational awareness, upgrades his emergency communication equipment regularly, and shares his knowledge with other photographers through workshops and online education programs. Share Ben's story with anyone planning wilderness adventures in bear country. His experience provides invaluable insights into bear behavior, survival techniques, and the mental preparation necessary for emergency situations. Understanding how a highly experienced wilderness professional survived a grizzly encounter can help others develop the knowledge and skills necessary for their own safety. Subscribe to Wilderness Survival Stories for more incredible accounts of human resilience in nature's most challenging environments. Ben's encounter with bear number 394 demonstrates that preparation, respect, and proper response can enable survival even in the most dangerous wilderness situations. Remember Ben Carter's words, "The wilderness tests you, but it doesn't have to defeat you." Respect the animals, understand the risks, prepare thoroughly, and never stop learning from every experience, both your own and others who have walked these wild paths before you. Bear number 394 and her cubs continue their ancient dance of survival in Glacier's pristine wilderness, unaware that their brief encounter with a human photographer has educated thousands about the delicate balance between experiencing nature's wonders and respecting its power. Ben's story ensures that both humans and bears can continue sharing these wild places for generations to come. In the end, Ben Carter's encounter with bear number 394 wasn't just a survival story, it was a masterclass in how knowledge, preparation, and respect for wildlife can transform a potentially fatal encounter into a powerful lesson about coexistence with nature's most magnificent predators.